Three key things that every nonprofit organization must use to build reports in Excel or Google Sheets. There are many days when all I'm doing is working in Excel or in Google Sheets to create a checklist, an overview, a summary, an internal monitoring report, a report for a donor, etc., etc. And through the years that I've been doing that, I've learned a lot of formulas and functions in Excel and in Google Sheets too. But to be honest, there are only a handful of things that I really use all the time. And I use them so much because they are very flexible and easy to understand for other people, the users of my checklists and my reports and my overviews and my summaries, even for people who are allergic to spreadsheets, who hate numbers, and who have a sort of block whenever somebody asks them, can you check this Excel, please, right? So in this video, I want to share with you three tools, three functions, three formulas that I use to build reports all the time. And the first one is the sum-if formula. It's a very simple formula. Basically, the formula says, if you find this term here, then add up all the numbers in that column there. Yeah, so for example, you want to make a report, an internal report, or maybe a draft report for the donor, and you have made an export out of your accounting system with all the transactions that belong to that particular project. And now you need to find a way to link the data of your accounting system to the budget lines in your project budget that need to be reflected in your report, right? So maybe you have a budget line for personnel, and so you need to make sure that all the items that are personnel in your accounting system are added up and reflected under the line, the budget line personnel, right? So you can do that very easily by adding a column to your accounting export data sheet and adding there the term personnel, and then saying in your reporting sheet, look for all the instances where you see the word personnel in the accounting export sheet, and then add up all the amounts that are connected to that term. And then you can have the total of all personnel costs shown in your reporting overview, and whoever wants to understand which items are included there, they can go to the sheet with the accounting data export, and they can look for all the instances where they see personnel, maybe using a filter, and then they can say like, yeah, that's correct, those are all the personnel items that I was expecting, and so yeah, this looks correct, it is more or less what I was hoping to see, that we have spent an X percentage of the total available budget in this reporting period, for example. But at the same time, it can also help your project coordinator see like, hey, this person isn't personnel, this person is a contractor. And so they should be, the expenses related to the contractor should be reflected somewhere else in the report. So we need to change the classification of this item from personnel to external contractor, for example, right? And so you can very easily correct things in the report without needing to make any changes to your accounting system or in your accounting system to the transactions there, because it might simply be a classification error where maybe I classified it as personnel, but I made a mistake there. Yeah, so that could be very simple to see. If we reclassify it, does the report then look better? And is everything then included in the right spot? And this is why I like the sum-if formula so much, because it's very transparent for the project coordinator, for example, to see like which items are included under personnel, and are these, for me, in my opinion, as a project coordinator, indeed the personnel items that belong to this project and that should be included in this report, right? So instead of talking about the report, about the draft report for a donor, much more easy with your project coordinator if it's easy for them to understand what you have been adding up and why you have added up those particular items, right? So that's my favorite formula. And now I want to know, what's your favorite formula in Excel or in Google Sheets? What's one function that you use all the time? And if you want, please also share with me how you're using it or what for you are using that all the time. I'm really curious to know. So please comment below this video if you want. I'm Susanne Bakker. I'm a nonprofit operations strategist, and I love all these things that most people find boring or confusing or maybe even scary about the back end of your nonprofit work, like finance, HR, admin, reporting, management, contracting, and more. So these are things I love, and that's why I talk about them in this YouTube channel all the time. If you like that, please feel free to subscribe to my channel so you can be notified whenever a new video drops. And if you prefer reading my stories about these topics, then please click the link below this video and join my weekly newsletter where I share stories and a link to my latest blog article about these topics. So let's go back to my favorite formulas. I shared with you my super first favorite formula, SUMIF. But then, of course, now I have my presentation of budget lines and expense totals based on my accounting system data through an export. Now I want to be notified, or I want to be able to see very easily in case there is a potential problem, like maybe an overspend waiting to happen that will cross the limit of the donor. And donors sometimes say that you can have an overspend per budget line of maybe 10% of the total budget for that budget line without any problem. But maybe if you cross the 10% overspend for that budget line, they want you to ask their permission beforehand by explaining to them why you need to spend more than you budgeted. Sometimes the percentage is 25%, sometimes it's 10%, sometimes it's 5%. It's different for each donor, but they all have a limit to what they can accept in terms of overspending on a budget line or a cluster of budget lines like personnel costs, for example, right? So it is good to be able to monitor that very quickly and easily. And of course, you can say, I can make a calculation for how much, what's the percentage of expenses incurred to date compared to the total budget. But then you need to really look very closely to spot, like, is it 7% and then 10% is the threshold. You might not remember if you have different donors that you're working with different percentages. You might not immediately remember that for this donor the limit is 10%, for that one it's 25%, and you might simply overlook that you are very near to that limit percentage. So for that I use the conditional formatting formula, which helps me to tell Excel or Google Sheets that if a cell has a certain value, it must color maybe red, and the text, the font, must also be dark red, so that it pops off the screen and I immediately see, hey, there's something going on with that cell, with that budget line, with that expense level, and I need to check that, right? So that could be like if a cell has a certain word, but in the case of percentage monitoring, you could say like, if the limit of the donor is 10%, I set my conditional formatting to turn those cells red with red text in it when there is an overspend of maybe 7%. So that it pops off the screen when it's 7% or higher overspend. And then I will see immediately, I need to pay attention to this budget line. I need first of all to check if everything is correct, if my SUMIF formula is pulling the correct data, if the classifications are good. And if they are, and if there's really an overspend there, then I need to talk with the project lead and see what's going on there. Is this something that they expect to continue? Do they expect that we might go through the 10% limit? Or do they say, no, yeah, it's overspent, but this was actually the last invoice that that contractor sent, and so this is the end, so it will not be more, right? So that's something then to talk about with your project lead, with your project coordinator, and it's easy to spot those things with the conditional formatting formula, right? So you don't depend on spotting the numbers correctly or remembering the threshold, the limitation percentage correctly for each donor. You can simply create this when you create your first reporting monitoring format for that project, and then you need to check the percentage, and you can set it for 10%, maybe at 5 or 6 or 7% as an early warning system. So then another formula that I use a lot all the time as well, actually, is the is formula. It's really a very simple formula that basically says, is this the same as this? And now you wonder, like, why would you use that? Because it's very easy to see that this is the same as this, but it might not always be so easy to see, and it might also be something that you forget to check once in a while, right? So one thing that you must always check is that if you have your accounting system export all the data from your accounting system for that project, then you want to make sure that all those data, all those transactions are included in the report, right? So the total of all transactions that you exported from your accounting system must be the same as the total that's in your report, right? And if it isn't, then you want to know about it, and then you want to understand why it's different, and you might want to change that, right? So you need to be able to spot that immediately. And of course, maybe in the beginning of a project, there are not so many transactions. You might have a very small export file, and it can fit on a tab that you can easily see on your screen. But I've also sometimes had reports with many export lines. My maximum has been 200,000. And then, of course, it's not so easy to scroll down and to see the total, and then to go back to your report and check that, and not go crazy with overload of Excel cells, right? So what you want to do is create a very simple formula, the is formula, saying the total of my export, which I can calculate once, and very often the export itself will calculate its own total. The total of the export of my accounting data is the same as the total that I have in my report. And you can make that formula very simply, just 2 cells, let's say 2 rows below the total report, where you say this is this, and if it's correct, that cell will say, spell the word true. If that's not correct, that cell with the is formula will spell the word false. So when you see the word false, and then you can also, of course, use conditional formatting to say, like, if a cell says false, color it red with red text, and if the cell says true, color it green with green text. So you can combine those 2 formulas. Then, of course, if it says false, then you know that you need to check if something went wrong with your sum if formula. Maybe you forgot to classify a transaction in your export sheet. Maybe you made a typing error. The sum if formula is very sensitive to typing errors or to adding spaces at the end, so it might be that it's not picking up something that you have classified correctly, or sometimes you have classified something and you didn't include that line in your report, right? So there could be all sorts of reasons why the total in your report is not the same as the total in your export, and you want to know, and you want that also to be something that pops out of the screen, so that if there's a mistake there, you will spot it easily before you send a report to a donor that isn't complete, right? Or before you share something with your project team that isn't complete and that might confuse them, right? So that's how the is formula has a lot of value, especially if you combine it with conditional formatting, right? So what I want to highlight with all of this is that it's really not rocket science to be a master of proper nonprofit finance management and accounting and proper reporting, right? Even if your accounting system isn't set up, or maybe it cannot be set up perfectly for proper reporting, you can make a great report with the sum if formula. You can have your own early warning system with the conditional formatting, and you can easily spot mistakes with the is formula, right? Very simple formulas that anybody can understand, right? And that's the key for me, because as finance, you are working in service of the team, the organization, the community, by creating understandable and reliable and timely finance data that will help build trust with donors and that will help the organization spend the money in the best possible way to achieve the most impact, right? And for that, finance needs to work with the project implementers, the project managers, the project coordinators, the project leads, however you want to call them. And for finance to work with project people, it helps if things are not overly clever in terms of finance, right? I can do a contest of who knows the most clever Excel formula or the most clever Google Sheet formula. But if my project person totally blocks when they see that and doesn't understand what that formula is doing, then it will be hard for them to understand if that draft report that I created for the donor, or if that monitoring report that I created for management purposes actually is correct and complete, and if they can understand if there are discrepancies or deviations between budget and real incurred expenses, if they can understand why that happened, and if they can explain that properly to the donor, either in time to request a budget amendment, or at least in the report to highlight, yeah, we have this overspend, but because of A, B, and C circumstances, that's why that happened, and we are in total control of everything, right? And the more you can work as a finance with the project people, the better the quality of your finance management will be. So it's not about clever formulas, it's about formulas that are transparent and easy to understand. And that's why I love those free formulas very, very much. Next week, I want to talk to you about how we can manage our money in our nonprofit in a time of crisis. And of course, in all those scenarios calculations, we will be using the formulas that I just shared with you, because as I said, these are things that I use all the time. I'm looking forward to seeing you next week in my next video and to hearing your stories below this video. Bye for now.